Chapter 15, Migration, Demographic Changes in a New Global World, 1300 to 1750. So this is a really lengthy title, but this is basically what we're going to be looking at in this chapter. Historians before the 1900s wrote about people and events. And starting in the 1900s, they began to consider demographics. And this is just looking at the population and viewing it in quantitative terms. And we've talked about like the Bantu migrations before, but this is just looking at the increase and decline and movement of populations across the earth. And so demographers will use like church records, marriage certificates, death certificates, baptism records to try to determine why populations grew, why they declined, and what did disease, famine, and warfare have to do with those reasons. So demographers basically study the migration patterns in the earth, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this chapter. Because keeping in mind, most average people could not read or write. Therefore, they left no written records. So all that we have of them are records that the church or the state kept. So even though we can't really get a glimpse of their personal lives, we can study the time and the society in which they lived. So the rise of European global influence from 1500 to 1750 led to the increased power of traders in European nation states. And we touched on that in the last chapter. The trade shift to the Atlantic. We also discussed that in previous chapters. The increased military technology and organization, wealth from the New World, slavery, and the aggressive spread of Christianity. So that's what we're going to be looking at in chapter 15. The New Europes. So this slide is going to be looking at the places that Europeans colonized, for the exception of Russian expansion. That's kind of by itself. But these three places are places that were colonized by Europeans, so they're called the New Europes. And we're going to start with the Columbian Exchange. This is important. You've probably heard this term used before, but this is just the exchange that took place between Columbus, or the Spanish and the Portuguese, and the natives that lived in the places that the conquistadors took over. And some of the exchanges were bad, like diseases that were exchanged, but some of them were good, like plants and animals and ideas were exchanged as well. Just to look at the pros and cons, we'll start with the cons first. Diseases killed about 90% of the American Indian population after contact with Europe. And so their population went from about 50 million to 4.5 million. That's almost everyone. Almost everyone was killed because of this contact. The reason for that was smallpox, measles, whooping cough, bubonic plague, malaria, influenza. So that is the one and only very large con. Some of the pros. From the Americans, the Europeans received the white potato, cassava, which is a major staple food in the developing world, which provided basic dietary form for over 500 million people. It's a drought-tolerant crop, so it's capable of growing in not-so-great soils. Cassava tastes like a sweet potato or a pumpkin. Also sweet potatoes, maize, and of course, lots of silver that the Americas contributed to this exchange. Of course, this led to the price revolution and caused inflation in Europe because it was so much silver flooding the economy. But that came from the Americas. And then from Europe, the Americans received wheat, horses, domesticated animals like cattle, sheep, and pigs. So this is, for better or worse, the Columbian Exchange. I'm sure you will see that somewhere on your AP exam. So looking at the first of the New Europes, North America, like we said in the last chapter, Spain was already in decline by the 1600s because of the challenges they faced from the Dutch, the English, and the French, who had better ships, powerful trade groups, the backing of their home governments and military. So there was a new wave of settlers going over to North America, and they were English, they were Dutch, and they were French. And the purpose of them going over there was to find wealth. They hoped to find a quick and easy path to gold and silver. So in the first wave, they sent people over, and they did not find what they were looking for. So in the second wave of migration, they decided to settle. And because there was a ton of land and not enough labor, the system of indentured servitude developed. And this is really the precursor to slavery. And the way this worked was the indentured servant would have his trip to the Americas fully funded, and in exchange for his trip, he would work for 7 years as a farmer, usually an agricultural worker, for the person who paid for his trip over to the Americas. And they would usually have a term of like 7 years, and then after they worked off their trip, after 7 years, they would be free to go and have their own plot of land and start their own family. But this type of system was needed for farming cash crops. And there's a difference in like crops that you eat, obviously, like rice or wheat, are different from cash crops. Cash crops are grown simply to make money. So this would be like cotton and tobacco. Sugar, I guess, would be a cash crop as well that was sold for a very large profit. Also, this type of system was needed to replace the workers who had been lost to the high death rate, especially in the West Indies. Those working on the sugar plantations died off really quickly, and they had an average of like 7 years to live once they started working there. So this type of system was needed. And even in the New World, where an indentured servant might be treated well, the death rate was still high. So New England attracted religious refugees, of course. We've heard of the Separatists and the Puritans, and they came over in collective settlements. Pennsylvania attracted diverse settlement because they offered religious tolerance. So there was all kinds of people from different religious backgrounds in Pennsylvania. Maryland specifically was a religious refuge for Catholics. And then you had the French, who set up various small settlements, and the Dutch, who claimed land near the Hudson River in 1624. This is what we now know as New York and New Jersey. And this, of course, was captured from them about 40 years later by the British. So life in the Americas. The second one is the Antipodes. That's not antipodes, but Antipodes. And this is Australia and New Zealand. If you're not sure that you'll remember that, I would write that down. The Antipodes are Australia and New Zealand. And so the years we're looking at here are 1600 to 1900. And there were few outside contacts with Australia or New Zealand until Captain Cook went over in 1768. Captain Cook was a British explorer, navigator, cartographer, meaning he made maps, and he was also a captain in the Royal Navy. He had actually made detailed maps of Newfoundland prior to making 3 Pacific voyages, during which he achieved the first recorded European contact with the eastern coast of Australia and the Hawaiian Islands, and the first recorded circumnavigation of New Zealand. Unfortunately for him, he was killed in Hawaii. But settlement was made possible in Australia and New Zealand because of his discovery. And settlement was possible for a couple of reasons. One, because they learned how to prevent scurvy, which happened a lot on ships, especially when people were sailing for long periods of time. Scurvy is a lack of vitamin C, and it causes just a general weakness, anemia, can cause gum disease, skin hemorrhages. But they figured out how to prevent scurvy. Also better navigation and figuring out longitude and latitude. But initially, the British saw Australia as a dumping ground for criminals. And so it was turned into a penal colony. So if you were a criminal and they didn't know what to do with you, they would just send you to Australia to live on the island. And harsh conditions prevailed in Australia until 1868, when they ended the systematic transportation of convicts to Australia. And so, as always happens, European arrivals destroyed the fragile ecology of the Aboriginal civilization, or the natives who live in Australia are called Aborigines. So European arrival hurt their ecology. Australian Aborigines initially retreated when the Europeans invaded, but ultimately resisted over a period of about 10 years. The British believed that the Aborigines could not be made to work. And those who, even today, still live in Australia, who are Aborigines, live on reservations. So it's similar to what the U.S. government did to the Native Americans. A similar pattern occurred in New Zealand with the Maori natives, and these people were very warlike. Even with the threat of the Maori attacking people, hunters from Europe and the America were drawn to New Zealand because of the seals, the whales, flax, and timber that could be profited from in New Zealand. So that brings us to South Africa. The Dutch East India Company was the first to enter and settle South Africa, and they did that in 1652. And their settlements included about 60,000 people, of whom a third were white. And the predominant African people there were the Khoikhoi and the San. And I'll put this spelling up here so you can have it. And San is just S-A-N. But the Khoikhoi were native pastoralist people of southwestern Africa. And the Dutch called them Hottentots because it was an imitation of the sound of the Khoikhoi language, or the Khoikhoi language. But this term is still used today, but it's considered derogatory. The San were various indigenous hunter-gatherer people from southern Africa. And in the 1950s, they switched to farming because the government enforced modernization programs. So the government forced them to go from hunter-gathering to farming. And the British eventually took the area just to keep it away from the French. And the Dutch formally ceded it or gave it up in 1814. So that brings us to Russian expansion. This is kind of a different topic in itself. But just a side note here, Russians expanded into Siberia in the late 1500s and began to take back some of the land from the Mongols. And they built trade forts, they expanded all the way to Alaska. The fur trade did begin to decline in the 18th century, but mining continued, and mining remained the most common local industry, especially silver mining. Large-scale settlement didn't come until later with the Trans-Siberian Railway, which made transportation across Russia possible. And the government used Siberia as a prison, basically, for political and regular criminals. So, slavery, enforced migration. This is exactly like it sounds. Because of the system of slavery, they were forced to migrate, essentially. And taken as captives and transported against their wills to the New World and to Europe. And the African slave trade was not new. It had been used in the Roman Empire and by Arab traders. But the Portuguese and other Europeans reoriented the trade routes of Africa to the Atlantic coast. And caravans continued to trade across Africa, but most of the trade came to the coastal towns. And here, Africans bought gold and slaves to trade to European shippers. They brought gold and slaves to trade to European shippers. And approximately 10 million slaves were carried to the Western Hemisphere, mostly to work on sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations. So that brings us to the plantation economy. This relied completely on slaves, and they used gang labor, whereby slaves were chained together and worked in gangs. Owners held legal rights over their slaves. Most of the time, they grew export crops, not food. These were large plantations that were in existence to make money, so they grew cash crops to sell. The sugar plantation was the worst possible place to be shipped off to. Slaves died young on sugar plantations, in Brazil and the Caribbean, and owners believed that it was cheaper to buy new slaves than it was to take care of the old ones. So like I said, their life expectancy once they wound up on a sugar plantation was 7 years. And usually because of the horrible conditions, they would die within 7 years of being there on average. So that brings us to the slave trade reinterpreted. It's important to keep in mind that the slave trade thrived in Africa before Europeans were involved. Europeans did offer new opportunities and new wealth, but this enterprise was built and sustained by Africans initially. Europeans remained in the coastal cities. When they went to Africa to buy slaves, they did not try to go inland to Africa because they feared the tribes they might encounter, the diseases, the wild animals. And so Africans captured slaves and brought them to the Europeans for purchase. And ironically, the cassava and maize brought to Africa by Europeans increased the population more than slavery depleted it. So those crops kept the population growing even though many were being taken out because of slavery. So that concludes our lesson for today.